Hello and welcome back to Chillers and Thrillers. I am your host Em, and in this podcast I read true stories of people's encounters with the strange and unexplained. No comedy, skepticism, or gore, only 100% true spooky tales. Today's episode is a Summerween special for those of us who crave a bit of Halloween no matter what the calendar or thermostat says. Summerween first became popular through the TV show Gravity Falls. But for those of us who live in the eerie and unexplained all year round, it's become a seasonal ritual. It's the celebration of all things Halloween during the summer. And what better way to celebrate this than traveling to one of the most haunted places in America, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, in honor of the anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. To go deeper into Gettysburg's haunted legacy, I spoke with members of U.S. Ghost Adventures. U.S. Ghost Adventures has over 150 ghost tours across the U.S. and operates 4 haunted attractions: the Lizzie Borden House, the Welty House in Gettysburg, the Axe Murder House, and this year, for the first time, the Jenny Wade House in Gettysburg will be open for ghost tours and overnight stays. Hannah and Joseph from the U.S. Ghost Adventures team met with me and shared the chilling history of one of their most haunted properties, the Welty House, as well as some of the true ghost experiences from their visitors at Gettysburg. As a Canadian, I was superficially aware of the history of the Battle of Gettysburg, a brutal clash in the American Civil War where over 50,000 men were killed, wounded, or went missing in just 3 blood-soaked days. As Hannah and Joseph from the team explained to me, Gettysburg is not a large town, and it was the epicenter of this bloody battle. As the dead men started to pile up and take on land, their fellow soldiers would hastily bury them in shallow graves. Civilians were caught in the crossfire between the Union and Confederate armies and would take covers in their homes and basement. There is also a water spring that runs underneath the town, and many paranormal enthusiasts believe in the power of water in holding energy. The sheer scale of trauma and death that occurred during the Battle of Gettysburg left behind what many believe to be a permanent spiritual scar. There seems to be a variety of different types of hauntings in towns and property, specifically residual hauntings and direct hauntings with ghosts interacting with visitors. This episode, I'll be telling some of the true stories of the ghost encounters at the Welty House, courtesy of the U.S. Ghost Adventures team, and also stories of people who encountered the unsettled spirits in Gettysburg. Now, let's not waste any more time. So turn down the lights, get comfortable, and listen in. The Welty House and Other Gettysburg Hauntings, submitted by U.S. Ghost Adventures. Gettysburg exists at a crossroads of energy and tragedy. Some believe the area is a thin place, a spot where the veil between the living and dead is worn thin, a 5th dimension outside of time and space. But even before the soldiers arrived at Gettysburg, there were rumors that the land may have been haunted from previous Native American tribes and their battles. According to Mark Nesbitt, a former National Park Service ranger and a historian at Gettysburg, years before the Battle of Gettysburg, another battle, one even bigger, may have occurred about a mile from Big Round Top. Maps show that 2 Native American tribes had territories delineating through Adams County, suggesting that it could have been a turf war between them. On the first night of the Battle of Gettysburg, Confederate soldiers reported seeing a man riding on horseback. The figure would appear and disappear in front of them and seemed to be wearing a Revolutionary War uniform. In June of 1863, much of Gettysburg population of 2,400 people fled on news of the upcoming Confederate Army from Virginia under the command of Robert E. Lee. As the battle moved into the town of Gettysburg, Confederate sharpshooters took up place in the homes and buildings within the town to use for their positioning. And in the middle of all this was the Welty House. The Welty House was built in 1830 and later purchased by the Welty family in the mid-1800s. It sits just 1,000 feet from the battlefield, making it a strategic stronghold during the battle, and has been described as a shooter's nest. Some died within the home, others just outside it. As the July heat baked the town, soldiers had to be buried immediately. 36 in total were scattered and hastily buried across the Welty land. In Gettysburg itself, thousands lay dead, and as one newspaper reporter at the time said, the air was polluted with a heavy, sickening, disgusting stench. There were efforts to clean the streets, bury the dead, and disinfect the area, but it was nearly impossible to keep up. Visitors to Gettysburg and the Welty house today describe a phantom smell that can pop up suddenly and pervade their noses. They have described it as wet or mildew. The owners and workers of the location have confirmed that there are no sources that would cause the sudden pungent smells, and many attribute it to the phantom smells of the deaths long ago. A decade later, their remains were moved out of the Welty property, but their spirits don't always follow the bodies. The Weltys were made up of Solomon Welty, his wife Jane, and their children. Across the street lived the Rupp family, and as the soldiers took over their homes, the two families hid in the Weltys' basement, where the Gettysburg water spring runs through, for shelter and access to water. Both families survived the onslaught, but many people theorize that the traumatic experience the families had, alongside the intense and multiple deaths, left a permanent scar on the house alongside the bullet holes that still lay there today. The home remained in the Weltys family until Jane's passing in 1891, when it was sold to Harriet Toote. The 133 acres of land was split and sold. In 1898, the Victorian mansion that is now Brick House Inn, including the Welty house, was built for Harriet's son, Charlie. The whole house and property is now called the Brick House Inn, with the Welty house being part of the inn. Charlie was a discerning man who was known to not be too kind to his workers, and the ghost of Charlie Toote is said to haunt the brick house, with visitors and workers alike reporting hearing a man speaking in a loud, commanding voice, requesting furniture be moved, and the sound of furniture being moved. And when the room where the sounds are being originated from are investigated, they're found to be empty. Melanie, the current manager of 26 years at the Brick House Inn, was working one day in what is called the South Carolina room. As she looked out the door, she saw a woman walking out of the room next to her called the Ohio room. The woman stared straight ahead, wearing an old Victorian outfit and bonnet. She walked silently down the hall, but the position she came out of the Ohio room had no doors, meaning she would have had to come through the wall of the Ohio room into the hallway for Melanie to have seen her. Fast forward to 2016. A woman named Susan Miller is visiting Gettysburg and staying in the Illinois room at the Welty house. This room was used as the sharpshooter's perch because it has multiple windows and balcony access. Susan was not a paranormal enthusiast. Rather, she was visiting Gettysburg for the historical experience. One night, at 3 a.m., Susan was awakened by the sound of cannon fire, an impossible boom in the quiet of modern Gettysburg. It seemed the sound had only awoken Susan, as she could hear no one else. After the boom, it was deadly quiet. As Susan got up to investigate, she saw him, the silhouette of a man standing in the corner. As her vision adjusted, she realized he was wearing a soldier's uniform. The man looked directly at Susan and said, "Keep your head down, ma'am," and then disappeared. Another visitor was touring the Welty house. While in the basement, she felt an icy hand grip her upper arm. At first, she thought it was her husband playing a joke with her, so she kept trying to shrug him off, until she turned and realized she was all alone and could still feel the hand wrapped its fingers around her arm. Just down the road from the Welty house is the Jenny Wade house. Jenny was the only civilian casualty in the Battle of Gettysburg, when she was struck by a stray bullet while baking bread for soldiers and civilians. For decades, it was believed the bullet came from the Farnsworth House Inn, but new evidence suggests the deadly bullet may have originated from the Welty house itself. Visitors and staff to the Jenny Wade house report doors that open and close on their own, disembodied voices, and the feeling of being watched. There have been specific reports of seeing her spirit in the basement or walking throughout the home and property. Shadowy figures peer from windows, the long-dead soldiers looking in for safety or shelter. Voices echo from nowhere. Some even claim to hear the fatal gunshot again and again. On a bittersweet note, when the Civil War began, Jenny was engaged to a Union corporal named Johnston Jack Hastings Skelly Jr. Without Jenny's knowledge, Jack had been seriously injured just 2 weeks prior to her untimely death. Jenny had never even known of Jack's injury, and a few days after her death, Jack died from his injuries. To this day, there are rumors that if you place your finger in one of the holes of the door that was shot through when Jenny died, you will become engaged not long after. The town also houses the Gettysburg College, and Penn Hall at the college was used as a morgue and hospital during the battle, and over 700 Confederate soldiers came through the college. A student named Henry Watkins reported at the time that if you stood anywhere at any time inside Gettysburg College, you could hear shrieks, prayers, and moans of the wounded. During the 1980s, 2 school administrators were leaving for the night when they got into the elevator. The elevator suddenly took them down to the basement. As the doors opened, what the women saw shocked them. The basement was filled with men, dying, moaning, and nurses running to and fro. The men were wearing outdated uniforms, and the stench of death and decay hit the women hard. As they panicked and pressed the elevator button to close the doors, they reported a man dressed in a Confederate soldier uniform looking at them beseechingly. Outside of the buildings and on the land itself, there are various creeks, forests, and hiding spots for soldiers and ghosts from long ago. So whether you're a seasoned ghost hunter or a curious first-timer, one thing is certain. In Gettysburg, the past isn't gone. It's waiting, listening, and sometimes even speaking. The Musket, submitted by user Stone093. A few months ago, I bought a musket from Gettysburg while I was in the area for a military-related school. I'm a huge history buff, and I wanted to add something unique to my milsurp collection. While visiting the battlefield, I stopped at a Civil War artifact store and spent some time looking for a musket in decent condition. After about 10 minutes, I spotted an original 1853 Enfield rifled musket in pristine condition. I don't know what it was, but something about it really drew me in. I just had to have it, so I paid the steep price and brought it home. Once I had time to inspect it more closely, I noticed the initials JR carved into the stock. The carving looked really old, like it had aged naturally with the rifle over the years, which makes sense for something over 150 years old. Not long after bringing it home, some strange things started happening. The first odd event was my daughter's interactive toy randomly playing sounds, as if someone was pressing buttons or turning knobs. It was not something that just happens on its own, and while it still occurs sometimes, it's less frequent now. Another strange thing is the blinds in her dining room moving on their own. I initially thought it might be from the air from the vent, but there's no vents on that side of the room. The most unsettling thing, though, is the sound of footsteps coming from our bedroom upstairs while we're downstairs. What's even creepier is the musket is locked away in that very bedroom. To make matters worse, my wife has called me multiple times while I'm at work, upset and frightened. She's especially spooked by the interactive toy and the footsteps when she's home alone. She wants the musket gone because she can't handle the strange occurrences anymore. I can't help but feel that these events are connected to the musket. Could it be that I unknowingly brought something or someone home from Gettysburg? We won. Submitted by user Suzanne Madron. The first time I visited Gettysburg when I was 16, I had never seen reenactors outside of the forts before. I was on a class trip and we got to Gettysburg for a state competition. It was around the anniversary of the battle, and it was when the reenactors were still able to camp out around town. We went to Devil's Den and up to Little Round Top to the Little Castle Monument. I was the first in our group on the observation deck, and there was, what I assumed, was a reenactor, staring out over the battlefield. But his uniform looked different from the other reenactors I had seen around town. He looked to be about my age, 16 to 18, and his uniform was Union colors, but looked almost like a modern-day marching band uniform. I started up a conversation asking why he looked so sad because he's Union and the North won the battle. He looked surprised and said, "We won?" My friends joined us on the observation deck at that moment and asked who I was talking to. I turned to make introductions, and the guy was gone. Fast forward a few decades, and I now live in the area. I told a friend of mine about the ghost I'd met at Little Round Top, and she took me through the museum at the visitor center to see if we could find the uniform. Turns out it was an artillery officer's uniform, and they tend to die of old age. Singing Civil War Ghost Girl, submitted by user Merits812. So this weekend, my husband and I made our first trip to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We stayed at an inn that was once inhabited by a girl named Tilly Pierce and her family during the Civil War. The house was used as a makeshift hospital. I've never had any experiences with the paranormal, so I wasn't expecting to have any here, even though it's said that this house is haunted. The first night we stayed there, on a Sunday, we decided to take a walk around town around 9:30, 10 o'clock. While we were getting ready, the light on the nightstand was flickering like crazy. Creepy, but could be explained, so we just unplugged it. We headed out for a walk, and no one was out. It had just rained, and the bars and restaurants were closed, so not much to do, but we were new in town and wanted to scope things out for daylight. We got back in at almost midnight, climbed up the creaking stairs to our room. To briefly describe our room, it was a street view and sat above the dining room area of the house. The other guests in the inn were fast asleep by the time we got back. We sat on the bed for about 10-15 minutes, and out of nowhere, we heard a young girl singing. I'd say mid-song, no music. The song sounded like some type of hymn, or maybe a popular song among the young people at the time. After about 30 seconds of singing, a muffled woman's voice, almost scolding, said something like, "You're 15. And that's all we can make out. Again, no one was on the sidewalks, and no other guests were awake, and there were no young girls in attendance as guests at this place. The sound came directly below us in the dining room area, and we had just walked in, about 20 minutes prior, to a darkened house. We both looked at each other in shock and still didn't register that it could be a spirit that we just overheard. Monday came and went, and Tuesday morning we gathered for breakfast at the dining room table of the inn with other guests. The innkeeper was talking about the history of the house and had mentioned that he brought a psychic into the house and she felt the presence of a young girl, possibly Tilly. Another guest said, "Wasn't she 15? My husband and I practically broke our necks looking at each other when we recalled what we heard that Sunday night. Now, Tilly didn't pass away in the house or even Gettysburg, but could it be a residual haunting? We both heard it so clear and loud. It was like hearing a snippet of a memory, but it wasn't bad or scary. It was actually beautiful." The Family Connection, submitted by user Odyssia. It was January of 2007, and I was in Pennsylvania for my grandmother's funeral. We had a little free time because we got into the airport in Baltimore early, so we stopped at Gettysburg to visit the battlefield. A little background on my family and Gettysburg. I was born right nearby and actually went to the battlefield when I was only 6 days old. I also had 2 ancestors who fought in and survived the battle, and we have family pictures from both sides of ancestors visiting the battlefield starting in the 1890s. I'm not sure why it has such a big impact on my family, but I personally like to stop there every chance I get and always wondered if something paranormal might happen. The weather was clear, but it was only in the 20s, so there was absolutely no one visiting the park. It was actually quite fantastic since I'd almost always visited in the summer when there were tons of people, tour buses, scout troops, etc. It was a real pleasure to enjoy it without the crowds. Which leads to my paranormal encounter. Since no one was there, I figured I would do what they recommend on ghost hunting shows, which is call out to the ghost and tell them that you're there. So I did that at a couple of places like the Wheatfield and Devil's Den before we headed up to Little Round Top. Finally, I headed out in the warm car to the 20th Main Monument. The monument is down a path from the road, through the trees and with a slight curve so you can't see back to where you came from. Over the past decade or so, the MPS has been working to make the battlefield look more like it did at the time of the battle, so they've cleared out a lot of the brush and undergrowth, which gives you a clear view of the area around you. I got out to the monument, talked to the ghosts, told them I was listening if they wanted to contact me. I took some pictures as I talked. It was almost perfectly silent. No cars or noises, just winter quiet. Suddenly, I hear a man with a deep voice talking right behind me, though I couldn't quite make out the words. I immediately thought he was just a creep and spun around to see who was there. No one. No one coming down the path from the road. No one on the horse trail that runs below. No one anywhere. I could even see the other people in the park that day down at their car far away at Devil's Glen. It honestly took me a moment to make the connection of ghost, and then I freaked out a bit and ran back to the car. The first thing I asked my parents if anyone had walked or driven by or headed down the path. No one had come by the entire time I was up there. So after this incident, I hadn't been back to Pennsylvania in years, until March of 2015 when I had a relative pass away. My parents and I headed up there, and of course, had to make a stop at Gettysburg. It was March, but once again, cold and snowing, with a nasty bit of fog. We got to the battlefield early in the morning, and while it was spring break, it seemed like most people were staying in the visitor center, not touring the battlefield. We went all over and finally ended up at Little Round Top again. This time, I took my dad out to the monument with me, as well as some flowers to place there, since genealogical work had found I am distantly related to Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, the colonel in command of the 20th Maine. So we head out into the fog and cold. Nothing happens. I take some pictures with my camera, place the flowers, and we get ready to head back to the car. My dad reminds me that my aunt will like a photo of the monument, so I pull out of my fully charged cell phone to take a picture. The second I hit the screen to take the picture, my phone goes dark, completely dead. About a minute later, it booted itself back up with a battery drained. It had never done that before, and it has never done that since. I didn't hear or see anything, but maybe they tried to use its energy to make contact. Honestly, I can't wait till I get back there. My negative encounter in Gettysburg. Submitted by user Garnet. I've never told anyone about this except my mom because I don't think anyone else would believe me. When I was 13 or so, my parents drove our family from Texas to Virginia to visit family. My mom is all about things being educational and killing two birds with one stone, so one of our stops was in Gettysburg. We took a day to tour the town and the battlefields, and then we were supposed to stay in a B&B that night. The B&B was located either right on or very close to one of the battlefields. The entire town was super creepy, and the B&B had a very weird feel to it, like there was tension in the air. We checked in and everyone went to bed. Around 3 a.m., I woke up, completely alert. Despite it being mid-July in a 19th century building with a window AC unit that limped along just enough to keep the temperatures below 80, the room was ice cold, and there was someone standing next to me. I'm very glad I had the presence of mind to not open my eyes or even move an inch. I'm pretty sure it knew I was awake anyways because after about 30 seconds, I could feel it lean down and look me straight in the face. It did not like me or my family. It wanted us out, and I could feel how angry it was. After a while, I left my side of the bed and went to look at my brother, my dad, and my mom. It stayed longest by my dad for some reason. I could tell because I could feel its footsteps on the floor. There wasn't a sound, but there was that definite feel of heavy feet on the floorboards. It came back around to me again and stood for a long time, very close, very hateful. Then it was just gone. I can't tell you how I knew it hated us and wanted us gone. It was like that feeling you get when someone is angry at you and you don't know why and you're scared to ask. Turned up to 11. I kept this to myself until about 18 months ago when I told my mom that I hated Gettysburg and wouldn't ever stay there again. She just said, "Is this because of that thing that was in the hotel room? I saw it too. And that's why I'm never going back to Gettysburg." My brief encounter in Gettysburg. Submitted by user Incubate Shuffles. So when I was about 13, me and my parents decided to visit Gettysburg one weekend as my dad loves history and my mom mostly likes looking at the old battlefields as well as browse antique shops. It was early Saturday evening and we had scheduled a ghost walk in which a tour guide took us around various haunted locations around the town itself and the nearby woodland and gave detailed stories behind each location. Well, our first stop was a place called the Sweeney House, where a short skirmish between Union and Confederate troops once took place, along with snipers being positioned in the attic. There weren't that many of us in the group, but the tour guide let us explore the downstairs of the house before we headed up to the attic. I broke off from my parents and eventually found myself in the kitchen area. I was taken by surprise when I saw a man, about 6 feet tall, in a dark blue Union uniform, standing there looking at a window, holding what I'm assuming was a musket over his shoulder. I'd say he was about mid-30s. Now, my original thought was that maybe he was a reenactor just exploring the town and whatnot. But as soon as I entered the kitchen, he took off with a brisk walk towards the front door where we came in. As soon as I looked around the corner to get an eye on him, he was gone. My ghostly encounter in Gettysburg. Submitted by user I Am the Walrus. I've always been completely enthralled with spiritual activity and the paranormal. Ever since I was 3 years old, I have been experiencing various encounters of all kinds. From full-bodied apparition to shadow peoples to objects moving on their own to voices and so much more. But here's where I share one of the most frightening yet thrilling experiences I've ever had. Back in February of 2015, my boyfriend and I needed to get away for a weekend and decided upon Gettysburg. While browsing events which were taking place on that weekend, I purchased tickets to the Jenny Wade and Orphanage Combo Tour. I was completely stoked for this experience and went in with an open mind, as spirits don't always live up to our expectations of them. Well, I bit off more than I could chew during this experience. Let me start by saying that the orphanage is the star of the story. When the tour was led to the cellar of the building, everything shifted. Not only was my experience at the orphanage rattling, the events to come were also strange and unsettling. During the tour, we learned that the woman who owned and worked at the orphanage treated the children terribly, punishing them senselessly in horrific ways that I will not mention. Cue to when my boyfriend and I arrived back to our hotel room. Remember, I am sensitive to paranormal happenings. We went to sleep with our television turned to Cartoon Network, and I woke up out of a peaceful and dead sleep around 3:30 in the morning. On the TV was an anime show featuring a little girl who was an orphan being abused by the woman who ran the orphanage. I felt completely paralyzed as I lay in bed. As I continued to watch this show, The little girl exclaimed that she would no longer let the orphanage mother hurt her anymore. While watching this show, almost against my will as it felt, I couldn't get past the notion that someone was standing near my side of the bed, looking over me. After what felt like an eternity of watching this show, I worked up enough courage to sit up and retrieve the remote from my boyfriend's side of the bed, switching the channel to something lighthearted. This was something I've never felt before, and for this, I do believe the energy of someone from the orphanage followed me back from the hotel that night. When I arrived home, there was no negative energy, but I did possess a feeling which stuck with me for a few days thereafter. Believe me or don't, your opinion is your opinion, but I've been having experiences of the paranormal kind throughout my entire life, and this was one of the most unsettling experiences I've ever had. I will not return to the orphanage in Gettysburg. This last story doesn't involve a ghost in Gettysburg, but it does involve the possible ghost of a Civil War soldier. I'm including it because ever since I've read it, it has freaked me out, and I'm thinking you guys will enjoy it just as much as I did. Nope Forever Woods, submitted by user Eka Freak. This story is from about 2 months ago. I have no clear explanation for what the hell happened, and it took me 3 attempts to work myself up to remember it in enough detail to write it down. So here it goes. My husband and I are moderately unambitious hikers, as in, we enjoy going for a bit of a hill climb in the morning and then visiting a local brewery or something in the afternoon. In about mid-August of this year, we decide to head over to a nearby Civil War battlefield. We live in Virginia. About 85% of our parks seem to have been Civil War battlefields, so this is not considered a strange thing to do at all. A friend of ours are visiting from Pennsylvania, so we invite them along. This group is composed of me, my husband, our friend who I'll call Sarah, and her 2 children, Tyler, who is 14, and Alicia, 11. We set off on one of the marked trails, but it's more difficult than we had planned. We scramble up and down about 3 heavily wooded hills, on trails that are eroding pretty badly thanks to all the recent rain. We stop at the bottom of hill number 3, looking up at hill number 4 from a bridge over a creek to catch our breath. Sarah and my husband are both trying to stay positive. Alicia is huffing and starting to whine, and Tyler clearly thinks we're all idiots and wishes he were anywhere else. Admittedly, he's a 14-year-old boy, so he's always on the verge of this attitude. While Sarah and my husband are working to rally the troops, I'm retying my boot and craning my neck to see if there's a secondary trail that's a bit less vertical that we could follow. At which point, I see him. Now, it should be noted that we have seen no other hikers until this point. This is a little unusual as this park is not far from town. It's accessible through a neighborhood, and we'd seen several dog walkers on the way in. However, we've taken what is clearly more of a nature trail than the flatter, better-maintained historic trail to the battlefield and cemetery, so I'm not initially concerned by the appearance of this new person. Quite the opposite, actually. I've been worrying for the past 30 to 40 minutes that we've lost the normal hiking trails and have been mistakenly following temporary stream cuts over hills and dale. In my newfound enthusiasm, I wave at the figure, who is too far away from me to make out features, except that they are wearing what I think are dark long trousers and a long-sleeved shirt. As I do so, my husband says, "Honey, who are you waving at?" I turn and say, "That guy," pointing at the top of the hill. But he's no longer visible. I shrug it off, thinking he must have started down the trail. We finally make it to the level ground about 20 minutes later. The trees are even beginning to thin out as we walk along a long ridge. We stop for another breather or water break at the first historical placard we've seen in the park. As Sarah reads aloud about General whomever and his exploits in 1860-something, I notice Tyler, standing about 5 feet away, looking back down the path. I wander over to check on him. "Who's that?" he asks me as I get close, pointing down the trail. "He's acting weird," Tyler says. I remember feeling my scalp shrink up a bit under my hairs. As I say, trying to sound unconcerned and like the responsible adult in the situation, "Weird how?" Tyler says, "I think he's crawling or something. Look." Now I really, really don't want to look. But there's still a possibility that Tyler may be messing with me because he's bored and 14. So I look. And I don't see whomever Tyler is pointing at for a minute. Until I look at the ground near where the trail levels off at the top of the hill, where there's a dark man-shaped thing laid out on the ground, kind of belly crawling. This is the point when I realize two things. One, I cannot make out any features on this person. Not clothes, not face, nothing. They are just uniformly dark, like they're perpetually in shadow, even while they are crawling across the sunnier parts of the trail. And two, we need to not be in the woods anymore. As I turn to Tyler to tell him to move through the visible battlefield area, where there are also several tour groups and dog walkers visible, my husband, Sarah, and Alicia suddenly join us, having noticed we were not participating in the historical marker read-along. My husband asks me what's up, and I say, quietly so nobody panics, "We need to head out. That guy is creeping me out." My husband squints down the trail and says, "What guy?" I look, and he's still there, but he's paused in the belly crawling and is kind of concealed by some brush. But he's visible. He's crawling towards us, I say, sure that this will convince my suddenly unobservant husband that something's not right. My husband squints right at where the guy is and looks at me, confused. Tyler sensibly decides that he's not going to wait around for the adults to sort this out. He takes his sister's hand and starts walking quickly towards the sunlight and non-shadow people. Sarah follows them immediately without a word to us. At which point, the man starts crawling towards us again. Needless to say, I'm done. The woods, which had been feeling cool and nice on a hot August day, now seemed clammy, cold, and inexplicably quiet. I drag my husband along with me without explanation, as it's clear he still isn't seeing the crawling man or whatever the hell this thing is. We make it out into the maintained sunny battlefield area, almost at a run. I don't look back until we are well clear of the woods, in its glaring sunlight with many non-shadow people nearby. I can't see the man in the trees. The tree line we have emerged from appears extremely dark in contrast with the bright sunny field. But I can't shake the feeling that he's still back there, just past where I can see. I don't want to freak anybody out more, especially Sarah and Alicia, so I don't say anything. I just watch the woods very closely as we explore the battlefield. The biggest problem now is that to get back to the parking lot, we have to go back into said woods. Luckily, the trail from the historical area is not the one we were on and is much wider, flatter, shorter, and full of people. I make the executive decision to behave like a herd animal and manage to chat our way in amongst one of the tours of Civil War buffs. We all walk off together towards the parking lot without incident, but I do note that Tyler is again sticking close to his mom and sister and not objecting to having to move at our new group's slow pace. Once we get to the car, everything seems fine. The cicadas and peepers have started back up, and the oppressive feeling is gone. It's just the Virginia woods in August again. We wait for most of the group to climb into cars as we say our goodbyes. We're towards the end of the queue, following one couple in a big SUV down the one gravel road out of the park. Suddenly, the SUV slams on the brakes, and we almost rear-end them. And then they sit there in front of us, on the only road out of the park, for no discernible reason, for several minutes. Finally, the chorus of annoyed horns behind us seemed to snap them out of it, and they start driving again. We follow, and as they exit, they pull over. My husband decides to check and see if they're okay because he's a genuinely nice person. He pulls up and rolls down the window. The driver rolls down his, and my husband asks if everything's okay. Sure, the driver says. But boy, that guy crawling across the road about scared the life out of me. At which point, I hear Tyler say, "Hell no," from the seat behind me. I can feel sweat popping out along the small of my back despite the AC. My husband says, "What man?" The SUV driver, who I think looks pale and kind of freaked out, said, "You didn't see him? A guy in dark clothes army crawled across the road in front of us. You didn't see him go back into the bush on the other side of the road?" "No," my husband says. I'm on the verge of hyperventilating at this point. Seeing this, my husband wraps up the conversation with a comment like, "Huh, weird. Well, if everything's okay, we'll just be going." We compare notes that afternoon, carefully, to keep Alicia and Sarah calm. Tyler and I saw the shadow man. Tyler independently described him as a man-shaped shadow, crawling towards us on that last ridge. Sarah would not admit to seeing anything, though she seemed extremely uneasy for the rest of the day, and will not let any of us mention it to Alicia. And my husband didn't see anything, but did note how quiet the woods had been for the last 5 to 10 minutes of our hike. I'm not sure what that was, but I can tell you I will not be hiking that particular park anytime soon. And that's all for this episode. So what are your thoughts? You know I'd love to hear it. I also wanted to thank all you listeners who have been rating the podcast, leaving your reviews, and especially Paul for becoming a monthly subscriber on Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you so much, Paul. I sincerely appreciate the support. I have some great updates coming up in the next season of the podcast, so if you guys are interested, please check out the Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you again to the U.S. Ghost Adventures team, specifically Hannah and Joseph. I can genuinely say that U.S. Ghost Adventures really cares about preserving the history of all these locations, and that everybody that works for them are not skeptics and fully believe in the unexplained. If you'd like to check them out, check out the show notes. Next episode is our last episode of Season 4, so make sure to join me on June 30th. In the meantime, I hope all you ghouls and ghosts stay safe, and I'll see you soon.